Thank you, Donald, and thank you for your support yesterday in my long-running battles with the lovely Hillary Clinton. So all day today you've been hearing on your channels the OECD. The OECD are telling us that if we had a second referendum and we came to our senses and voted to rejoin the European Union, that could have a significant and positive effect on the UK economy. It's also downgrading its growth forecast for the United Kingdom down to 1% for next year because of the uncertainty of what will happen in post-Brexit Britain. Now, this, of course, is not the first time we've heard from this and many other of these intergovernmental global organisations because they were all part of Project Fear during the referendum campaign in 2016, all telling us that terrible, dire consequences would befall the British nation if we dared to vote to leave. But I wonder, do you know what the OECD is? Well, let's just sort of have a little look at how they got started and what they're supposed to do. So, the OECD, founded in 1960, based in Paris. Its aims are very clear. It is the expansion of world trade on a multilateral, non-discriminatory basis. And they commit to avoid developments that might endanger economies. Who pays them, I hear you ask? Well, have a guess who their biggest contributor is. In fact, their biggest voluntary contributor is. It's the European Union, who 10 years ago were paying them just a few million euros every year, but this year are set to pay them over 40 million euros. That's double what the next biggest contributor is, namely the United States of America. So we're paying them because, of course, we pay money into the European Union. We are a net contributor to it. But also, the United Kingdom is a member of this in its own right, and on top of that, we pay them up to around about £10 million every single year. So we're paying money into this organisation, and let's just have a little think about whether we should be doing that. The OECD has no right in any way at all, given the aims upon which it was set up with its own charter, to interfere and to make political judgments. In fact, what they ought to be doing, they ought to be urging the European Union and the United Kingdom to have a free trade agreement, to continue tariff-free trade, because if we don't, there could be some elements of disruption. But of course, far from doing that, they are playing an overtly political game by saying to us that a second referendum and a vote to rejoin would be a good thing. And of course, he who pays the piper calls the tune. And it's the European Union that are keeping their very nice lifestyles in Paris going, and that is why they're coming to their aid and supporting them in every way they can. And frankly, I think we should stop paying our UK contributions to them right now, and I wouldn't be surprised if one or two voices here in the USA felt the same way too. So in the light of all of this, do you agree with me that it's beginning to look like there's a global elite that wants to stop Brexit from happening? If you think, Nigel, you've gone too far this time, you sound like a conspiracy theorist, then call me on 0345 6060 973. Maybe you think actually it's inevitable because of all these big organisations. Maybe Brexit's never going to happen. You can text me on 84850, or perhaps you're just sick to death of all the gloom and negativity around these Brexit arguments, and you can tweet pretty much anything you like using the hashtag Farage and LBC on @LBC. And you can watch me on Facebook. I'm live here in Los Angeles. So, are the global elites trying to stop Brexit from happening? I wonder what Dan, who's a new caller to this show and lives in Wimbledon, thinks of that. Dan, good evening.
Evening, Nigel. How are you?
Well, I have to say, you know, I listen to these news reports of all these organisations and quite a lot of the, sort of high political figures who are part of the global elite, and it makes me pretty angry, Dan. It's as if Project Fear wasn't enough. To me, Dan, they're trying to do the same thing again.
Well, I agree. I mean, to be honest, since the Brexit vote, the next day when it came out, I was shocked. I thought, okay, it's a charade, give people free choice, okay, but I'm the puppeteer. I've got the left hand and the right hand. Pick a hand. Whichever hand you pick, I can change the outcome anyway because I'm in control. But they gave this free choice to make people think they're in control. And I don't think it actually went the way they wanted. Now, that was because of probably people like yourself and other people that actually said, look, what are we getting out of this? Everyone, so for different reasons, obviously some people misled and different reasons, but either way we voted, and that was the vote. But I said, from the day one, everyone said, we'll do it. I said, promise you, we won't come out. We will not come out, because this is not the plan.
So you think, Dan, in short, and your line's a bit crackly, but you think, in short, that the global elites are going to keep us in, do you?
They're going to keep us in. That's the plan. They want centralised power. The Bilderbergers, that's the meetings that you want to know what the plans are, the Bilderberg groups. And that's the Hillary Clintons and this and that. That's their meetings. That's where I want to know what
Dan, thank you. Dan, thank you for your call. Not a great line. Dan talked about the Bilderberg Group there. The Bilderberg Group is an organisation through which governments and big global business and political figures come together, have conferences once every couple of years or so. Ben in Barking is my next caller. Ben, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you doing?
Well, I'm just a bit annoyed with all these people, Ben. I've sort of had enough, really. Dan, my previous caller, thinks that the global elites are going to succeed and stop Brexit from happening. What do you think?
Well, firstly, I hope they do, because I think Brexit's going to be a complete disaster. But my question to you would be, did you not think that maybe a bit of economic self-harm was perhaps what the price of Brexit was, and that actually maybe if our economy goes down a little bit, the price of sovereignty is preferable?
Oh, Ben, as far as I'm concerned, our democracy, our self-government, our rights to be the determinants of our own future, our identity, our nationality, are not for sale.
Of course, but then say if the OECD are saying, well, for all those things, the economy is going to take a bit of a hit, do you not think that's a natural consequence that the fact we are getting all those things back, as in your imagination, then that is going to be a price worth paying for?
Well, let me tell you, Ben. Let me tell you, Ben, about the OECD, OK? The OECD said in 1990 it'd be a good thing if we joined the exchange rate mechanism. I was fiercely opposed to it. And it led, by 1992, to false interest rates in Britain at double what they should have been, record house repossessions and record business bankruptcies in that year. And then, as if that wasn't enough, the same OECD said we should join the euro. And thank God we didn't do that. Otherwise, I hate to think what our position might have been. And now the same OECD tells us not to vote to leave in the referendum, and now says we should have a second referendum to rejoin. I would put it to you, Ben, their track record on forecasting economics for the UK has been dismal. And you know something? Nobody can tell you whether staying in the EU or Brexiting will make us better off or worse off. I believe it gives us the opportunity to be better off. But ultimately, Ben, that referendum wasn't us betting on economic forecasts. It wasn't saying, you know, we're voting Brexit for a higher or lower stock market. It was about running our lives, controlling our borders, and making our own way in the world.
Do you not think at the moment, though, it's not looking too rosy for our economy? I mean, the pound has plummeted down.
The pound.
Looking at the prospect of no deal and the idea. I know the pound's good for exports. So if we're talking, like you said, for ordinary people, the fact is we might be in a situation where food prices are going to rocket.
Ben, we really must stop this argument about the pound. The pound has been falling very sharply since 2010. In fact, you could argue it's been falling sharply for the last 2 decades. You could even say 150 years. The pound fell far more in the years that preceded Brexit than it has fallen since, all right? So I'm not going to go for that. As for no deal, well, the big problem we've got, Ben, is dither and delay. Because frankly, I just don't know where this government in the end is going to take us. Am I scared of no deal? Of course I'm not. Because no deal, I think, is far better and cheaper than the deal we currently have today. But Ben, I take your... where I do agree with you is there is so much negativity. There is such a total lack of leadership that if you look across the world today, and there's some polling out today by Ipsos Mori, asking people, do you think your country is headed in the right direction, right? And in China, 87% of people say yes, and we are the lowest of every major country in the world at 28%. So, Ben, I will agree with you. I will agree with you that there is a lot of pessimism around, a lot of pessimism being encouraged, but I put that down not to the consequences of Brexit, but to bad leadership and a lack of direction.
So if we had better leadership, people would just feel more positive about what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think honestly, I think if people knew where we were going, they'd be much more assured. And I'll tell you one thing about business, Ben, and I spent 20 years in business before getting involved in politics, which kind of makes me a bit unusual in the political world these days. Businesses adapt to whatever their circumstances are. The biggest criticism of business at the moment is they just don't know what those circumstances are going to be.
How are the small businesses going to adapt when they suddenly have to go through piles and piles of new regulations and tariff documents because all of that existing framework's removed if we have no deal? Surely that's going to cripple a small business.
Ben, let's just be frank about this, all right? Only 12% of the entire UK economy is exports to the European Union. Over 80% of all economic activity that takes place in the United Kingdom takes place within the United Kingdom. The vast majority of our 5.2 million small businesses and small traders do not trade with Europe, do not trade with the rest of the world. They trade within the UK, and far from more regulation, Brexit gives us a chance to cut some of the regulation. Ben, I thank you for your call. I understand your scepticism. I understand why perhaps a lot of people are beginning to feel a little bit negative, but I do genuinely believe this is because we have a total lack of leadership in this country. It is dither, delay, and it frankly isn't good enough. As the Paris-based OECD, an intergovernmental organisation, tells the British that if we had a second referendum and we opted to rejoin the European Union, that could have a positive and significant impact on the global economy. I'm asking you whether, like me, you're beginning to believe that the global elite are trying to stop Brexit from happening. Because you see, it's not just, is it, the OECD? Let's just remind ourselves what my close personal friend Hillary Clinton had to say about Brexit on Sunday.
I personally continue to believe in the value of the European Union and, more broadly, of a Europe that is whole, free, and at peace. No small accomplishment. And Britain has always been a linchpin of that vision. What's missing in both of our countries at the moment, it seems to me, and what we need more than anything else, is empathy.
So there's Hillary telling us the EU has brought us peace and prosperity and it's fantastic and Brexit's a mistake. And there's another member of the global elite, a fully paid up, some would argue fully paid member of the global elite, trying to do much the same thing. We heard from him not so long ago. His name, Tony Blair.
This decision is life-changing for this country. And this is a moment when every member of Parliament, including the people like Michael Fallon, who frankly believe that Britain's better off in Europe and not out of it, have got to see if there is a way of meeting people's legitimate grievances and anxieties that gave rise to that Brexit vote, but do it in a way that doesn't undermine the economy of the society and the country and its standing in the world.
Brexit must be reversed. It's Blair, it's Clinton, it's the OECD, it's the big banks, it's the big businesses. Folks, I genuinely believe the global elite are working together on a conjoined basis to try to stop Brexit from happening. The very same people who all came together through Project Fear to tell us we should not, absolutely not, vote to leave in that referendum. Am I getting this right? Am I sounding a bit conspiratorial? Tony says to me, I don't normally believe in conspiracy theories, but there do seem to be a lot of stories and opinions in the mainstream media trying to create a narrative in people's minds that they should change their views on Brexit. We came through an armada, the Napoleonic War, 2 world wars, many recessions, traitors and weak people wish to drag down Britain. The elites got it wrong in the referendum, and they are wrong now. Jason is calling me from Notting Hill. Jason, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. Just a simple question. I just wondered what you've been smoking there in the US. Because, without being rude, it's just a quick question. I'm appealing here to the ex-businessman that you were, not the politician. But just a simple question. Could you name me the percentage of physical commodities that are owned, produced, manufactured, and sold from the UK externally?
I'm sorry, physical commodities. What are you asking how much copper we produce or coal we mine? What are you asking?
I'm talking to you about any products that we actually sell, that we actually own. Companies, British companies, we own, we produce, and we sell.
Jason, that sounds like a very narrow-minded, nationalistic, isolationist, draw-the-bridge-up approach to how we operate in the global economy today. You could argue, if you wanted, Jason, that isn't it awful that all the car factories across the United Kingdom are now owned by foreign companies? That's the point you're making. But, Jason, I would say this to you. We are now manufacturing more motor cars in the United Kingdom than we've ever done at any point in our history. And for our exports, we're now selling many more of them to the non-EU world than we are to the EU world. And, Jason, Brexit wasn't about pulling up the drawbridge. Brexit was about taking control of our country, our borders, and being able, in terms of trade and business and investment, to open ourselves up to a bigger, wider world.
Can I talk now?
Well, I mean, I think you had a fairly good go, but I've answered your question.
You're actually quite wrong in what you just said, because one of the reasons... the reason you're wrong is because it's quite simple. The reason the Toyota, Nissan, Renault, all those wonderful international companies are here, since we're talking about cars, which is what you wanted to pick on, is because they've got access to the European market. You're not going to have Nissans going from the UK to the United States of America or to Latin America, because very simply, guess what? Volkswagen have got plants there, Nissan have got plants there, and so on and so forth. It doesn't make sense in a world to actually export and pay those tariffs and pay those fuel costs when we're trying to reduce our CO2 emissions and carbon footprint to do that, Nigel. So it's being part of that big, wider 500 million plus number that is actually applicable. So you're
Jason, don't tell me the EU's is the biggest, most important market in the world. This is the argument that Cleggs and others use. It's about, look, is it important? Yeah, but it's about 15. It's about 15%. It's 15. Jason, it's 15% of the world economy. 15% of the world economy.
The question I asked you was actually 20%, and the other 80% are professional services, which you haven't adhered to as well, which is something that when you were a politician under Thatcher, you would realise that Mrs. Thatcher actually placed this country to be a professional services capital of Europe, and that is why the investment from your American friends have come in. Therefore, law firms, whether it's banks, whether it's accountancy firms, you name it. Now, if you look at what's happening right now...
Jason, I think, Jason, you are missing. London moved to Dublin in the early 1990s in a very, very big way. And do you know why? Because the corporation tax rate there was 12.5%. There are lots of factors and lots of reasons that businesses move, but we find ourselves actually in the middle of the world's daily trading market, speaking the language that's embraced by the world. But Jason, you want to talk about economics. The question I was asking tonight, is there an attempt by the global elites to, like the OECD and the Blairs and the Clintons, do you think I'm right when I say there's an attempt of them to get together to stop Brexit from happening?
No, I don't, because the bottom line is these institutions exist to prevent chaos, which is what you're trying to do. You're a fond believer of Aristotle's book, which is that controversy creates cash. I'm sorry to say, controversy creates destruction and creates chaos and creates more problems.
So, Jason, just to finish off, there is no element of collusion in any way at all between Blair, Clinton, the OECD, and everybody else.
I'm sorry, why don't bring the Pope into this as well? Because obviously you're just using anybody that comes into it that says that the controversy is wrong.
Jason, I thank you. I'm going to ask Mike in Hemel Hempstead exactly the same question. Mike, am I wrong to think that all these people are getting together to try to stop Brexit?
Good evening, Nigel. Thanks for taking my call.
Good evening.
You're bang on the nose, mate. You're bang on the nose. I'd like to thank you for affording us the opportunity to leave this totalitarian superstate. And I'll tell you why I'm using those words. I read in the paper today that the Prime Minister of Austria, the new Prime Minister of Austria, has been told by
31-year-old Sebastian Kurz, go on,
That's right, has been told by Mr Juncker to form a government which is EU-friendly. Rather worrying.
Well,
Now, if you couple that, if you couple that with what went on in Catalonia, who is to say that somebody in the EU high up didn't say to the Spanish government, send in the bother boys, sort them out?
Mike, listen. Mike, I agree. I agree with you. I do agree. I think Catalonia was a moment where the mask slipped, as far as the European Union is concerned. I think Juncker's call for him to form a pro-EU government, given that 56% of voters voting for the two biggest parties voted for border controls, and certainly the Freedom Party, who got nearly 30% of the vote, are fiercely Eurosceptic on a whole host of issues. But
and
Mike,
lastly, Nigel,
Mike, the question tonight wasn't so much an analysis of what's wrong with the European Union. It was whether there is a big global attempt to stop Brexit from happening.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, I totally agree with that. But lastly, I'd like to say, they want to form a European army. Now, is that to defend them from enemies without, or to control the populace within? I think we're seeing the birth of a totalitarian superstate. We're watching it before our very eyes, the same as they did in 1930s in Germany. I
don't disagree that the EU is fundamentally anti-democratic and perhaps in many ways quite dangerous in terms of the direction in which it's headed. Mike, I thank you. Difficult there with Jason and Mike to get them back to the issue, but I genuinely think there is a big global attempt to undermine and to try and stop Brexit from happening, and it does. That movement have with it many fellow travellers within the United Kingdom, whether it's the Nick Cleggs, whether it's the Keir Starmers, whether it's the Alistair Campbells, who really rather lost his rag on Good Morning Britain this morning. There's a big attempt. They want to stop Brexit from happening, but I'm not convinced, I'm really not convinced that any of this is making any difference to public opinion in the country at all. Yes, we are feeling a little bit depressed with constant bad news, frustrated by a lack of leadership, dither and delay, but I don't think it's changing people's minds at all. In fact, I think people saw Project Fear back in the referendum in 16 as being something that was massively overplayed, and I don't think we're prepared and ready to listen to those same voices again. And I'm saying that to you, Hillary, and to you, Tony Blair, and above all to you, the OECD, whose biggest donor is the European Union, whom you come out and support as strongly as you have today. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. I really do think the global elites are coming together to try and stop Brexit from happening, and they've got many fellow travellers within the United Kingdom. But first, the UK is facing a multi-dimensional threat that is rapidly evolving at a scale and pace we've not seen before, the Director General of MI5 has warned. Andrew Parker said the security service is operating at an unprecedented level and has seen a dramatic upshift in threats this year. It is at the highest tempo I've seen in my 34-year career, he said. Today, there is more terrorist activity coming at us more quickly, and it can be harder to detect. We are now running well over 500 live operations involving around 3,000 individuals known to be currently involved in extremist activity in some way. That is the depressing but no doubt truthful statement from Andrew Parker, Director General of MI5. And I suppose one of the things that worries me is if you look at the attacks such as London Bridge, not everybody involved in those attacks had already been placed on a list as being suspected of being involved in some way in extremist activity. Who knows? We're told there are 23,000 people in the country who are either directly suspected of extremist activity or linked to people that are. Who knows? The figure could be much, much bigger than that. I wonder when. I really do. I wonder when somebody who's been involved in government over 3 or 4 decades of encouraging division and multiculturalism and not assimilation in our communities will come forward and apologise. I suspect they never, ever will. So yesterday we were talking about Theresa May, David Davis, in Brussels, having dinner with Mr Juncker and Mr Barnier to attempt to break the deadlock over whether, we could move on and start talking about trade at the summit on Thursday and Friday of this week. Little seemed to come from last night, but today David Davis was up before the House of Commons and talked not just about his hopes, but also talked about what would happen if we simply couldn't break this deadlock and nothing could be done. This is 1:50 p.m. today, and the time's crucial, 1:50 p.m. today. This was David Davis in the House of Commons.
We all have to recognise that we're reaching the limits of what we can achieve without consideration of the future relationship. I hope the leaders of the 27 will recognise the progress made and provide Michel Barnier with a mandate to build on the momentum and spirit of cooperation we now have.
So that was in response to Keir Starmer, and Davis making it clear that no option has to be there, kept on the table, and that's there to pressure Brussels into hopefully seeing common sense and coming to a free trade deal. But can you believe, at 2:40 p.m, that is only 50 minutes after David Davis was officially responding after that dinner that he and Theresa May had in Brussels last night with Juncker and Barnier, Amber Rudd, just 50 minutes later, said this.
I think it is unthinkable that there would be no deal. It is so much in their interest as well as in ours, in their communities, in their families, in their tourist interest, to have something in place. We will make sure that there is something between them and us to maintain our security.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. So within 50 minutes, the Home Secretary directly contradicts what the Brexit negotiator who'd been with the Prime Minister in Brussels last night had said. And it's worth thinking, isn't it, that actually the Prime Minister herself has said we have to be prepared for every eventuality. Boris Johnson, of course, said it would be perfectly OK if we had to leave without a deal. Some are going further. James Duddridge, a Conservative MP, he says actually that no deal is now his preferred route so that we can get a quicker, faster Brexit where we all understand where we are. And yet, the Home Secretary directly contradicting other parts of the Cabinet within an hour of that statement. And I have to say, it just can't go on like this. You know, Theresa May is playing a game as if the most important thing is to hold the different wings of the Conservative Party together. But the point is, how do you think that looks to Barnier, Verhofstadt, Juncker and the negotiators in Brussels? We look like a laughingstock, and they will go on playing games with us for as long as they can because they know there is not a united response from this government. And I think what Mrs May ought to do is either sack all the Remainers in the Cabinet or sack all the Leavers in the Cabinet, and at least can we have a Cabinet and a British government and some direction that actually knows where it's going, because this, frankly, makes us look ridiculous, weakens our position, and honestly, I cannot imagine how they must be laughing behind our backs in Brussels when Mrs May turns up there for these important talks on Thursday. Back to my earlier theme, the OECD telling us that if we had a second referendum and maybe had the sense to vote to rejoin the European Union, it would have a positive and significant impact on our economy, and that falling, you know, hard on the heels of Hillary's pro-EU tour. Not just of the UK, she's off to France and off to Germany too, Mr Blair and many, many others. Are the global elites trying to stop Brexit? I think they're working together towards that aim. I wonder what Nick in Sevenoaks makes of that proposition. Nick, good evening.
Good evening. My reason for calling, and I've waited for nearly half an hour listening to you.
I'm sorry.
And your love of your own voice. Why are you?
Oh well, Nick. I tell you what, Nick. I tell you what, Nick. There are loads of other. I tell you what. There are loads of other. You can call the BBC. There are talk shows everywhere. The fact you've been kept in a queue is because a lot of people want to speak, text, and tweet. And I do my best, Nick, every evening to get through as many of you as I possibly can.
Right. Let me make my point then.
Please.
Why are you so angry with the OECD for saying the same thing as you are on record as saying?
Which is what?
You were on record as saying that Brexit would hit the economy and that you saw that as a price worth paying. As a millionaire, of course, you would.
Hang on, Nick. Point number one.
Did you not say that?
No, of course not. Point number one.
Yes, you did. I can cite the article in which it was reported that you said Brexit would be a price worth paying in terms of the hit to the economy. Now, you were talking about it in terms of a short-term hit, not a long-term hit.
Nick, what I said was that it was impossible to predict. Nobody could predict, economically, what staying in the European Union would mean for the British economy. Equally, nobody could 100% predict what leaving the European Union would do to the European economy. But the point I made, Nick, and I will repeat it, is that not everything in life is about GDP figures. Not everything in life is about the value of the stock market. But actually, there are issues about democracy, about nationhood, that matter far more. And if you'd given me the choice, would I have accepted... I mean, had the proposition been, would you be prepared to be a little bit poorer and to be free, I'd have voted for it. But I don't think Brexit means we have to be poorer, OK?
Well, I disagree with you, and all the evidence is pointing towards us being poorer, weaker and more divided. And I don't want a country that is like that.
All right, Nick, can I ask you, to you, does money matter more than liberty and freedom?
I value them both equally, and I don't see them as a false dichotomy in the way that you do. And I think that we have sufficient liberty and sufficient freedom, including freedom of movement as members of the EU, and to try and make out that they're a global elite, and to try and make out that this is some sort of conspiracy. I'm not watching you on Facebook, but I can only imagine that you have your aluminium foil hat on when you say things like that.
So what I read out, and you've obviously been listening very intently this evening, when I read out to you the charter, the aims of the OECD, would you not agree with me that what they did overnight directly contradicts those?
No, I think what they were doing was pointing out the consequences of a decision which the British people have taken, and the consequences if the British people should decide to reverse that decision.
Okay,
that's entirely consistent with what you said. Something else you said was that you didn't believe that Brexit would be a disaster, but if it was, you would leave Britain. Now, how much patriotism is there?
No, that was a completely tongue-in-cheek throwaway line. The OECD is there to promote an expansion of world trade on a multilateral, non-discriminatory basis. It is there to avoid developments that might endanger economies. Well, right now, post the democratic result, the one thing that could endanger economies ever so slightly, European ones more than us, is that we don't come to any agreement at all. So they should be doing what they've been there since 1960 to do, Nick. Should they not be encouraging a grown-up free trade agreement between us and the European election, the European countries, and not playing politics?
Well, I mean, you can't accuse anyone of playing politics when you're a politician. It's the game you play all the time.
Yeah. If you're in politics, no, Nick. If you're in politics,
then you're playing politics.
You do politics. If you're working for an intergovernmental organisation funded by taxpayers all over the world, especially those in the European Union, and your charter, it does not give you any permission to play politics, surely you shouldn't be doing it.
Well, politics and economy and economics go hand in hand. You've been playing politics all the way through this. The OECD is pointing out the consequences of a decision which has been made. I believe that decision was made on the basis of misinformation, but you may disagree with that.
Nick, do you want a second referendum, Nick, or not? Yes or no?
I don't want us to leave the EU. I think it's against our national interests, and I regard the people who led that particular movement as being either misguided or being deliberately misleading, and I'm not quite sure which. The only thing I can remember is you actually standing up in the EU Parliament and making speeches which weren't really about persuading people in the EU. They were playing to the audience at home, and a particular kind of audience. And that was playing politics.
How shameful of me, Nick. I've spent all these years trying to change public opinion in Britain so that we can become a free, self-governing nation. You may hate it, But tell you what, there's millions out there, Nick, that are pleased that I did it. I promise you, it's true. In the light of the OECD overnight telling us that if we in a second referendum voted to rejoin the European Union, that would have positive impacts, beneficial impacts on the UK economy, I'm putting forward the idea that the global elites are working together to try to stop Brexit from happening. And those that are ringing up and disagreeing with me are saying, but Brexit's a disaster. It must be reversed. It's awful. Well, fine. That's your opinion. The question I'm asking is, do you think these global elites are working together? I'm absolutely certain. It's the same gang who did their best through Project Fear to try to stop us voting Brexit that are doing the same thing again. On Twitter, I get, the OECD have been wrong so many times, I'm surprised anyone gives them the time of day. Well, here, you're right about that. All the losers, through their own greed and agendas, who have caused such untold chaos and misery, are joining forces to stop Brexit. Good luck. Well, they'll need good luck, because I can't see us changing our minds, despite all of this. Debbie says, does anyone else think that our government is not listening to the people? Yes, I think a majority of the country believe that. Gareth says the OECD is doing what's needed because none of our politicians are doing it. Oh, yes, they are, Gareth. There's loads of them. The Labour benches are full of them. The Lib Dems are full of them. Alistair Campbell was there this morning. There are lots of people out there saying the referendum must be reversed. Plenty of them in UK politics, some of them in the UK's big businesses too. Paul is my next caller from Livingston. He's a new caller to the show. Good evening, Paul.
Good evening, Nigel. Thank you for taking my call. Long-time listener, especially to your show. I bypassed the slavery in transit, which was the slavery in transit factory, May Days, which is now in Turkey.
Yes.
I don't believe for one moment that we could have a car industry again. I remember watching one of your businessmen speaking at one of your conferences a couple of years ago saying, why are we not dealing with South America?
Paul, rotten line, we're going to come back to you. Rodney from Bradford. Rodney, good evening.
Hi, Nigel.
Hello there. You're a new caller as well to the show, so tell me.
Yeah, nice to speak to you. I'm just concerned that you're talking about a global elite that you seem to be part of.
Oh, really? Oh, that's nice of you. That's really nice of you to say so. Thank you.
You and Tony Blair are part of the same coin. You're just on opposite sides.
So,
your links to Trump, Russia, Assange, Putin, Cambridge Analytica.
Rodney, tell me what my links are to Putin. Go on, please. You are on LBC. You've got the chance to expose me to the nation in terms of my links to Mr. Putin. So off you go, son.
I don't have the wherewithal to find the links. But
so how dare you come on the radio and accuse me of that if you've got no evidence to back it up? How dare you?
They will come out eventually. You will be found out.
Rodney, who do you think you are to go around making accusations like that are based on nothing at all?
Well, they are, aren't they?
No, I'm sorry. Yeah. That really is utterly ludicrous, isn't it? And let me tell you something. Unlike Tony Blair, I spent 20 years working in the private sector. I had a proper job before getting into politics. There are no comparisons, Rodney, between me and Blair at all.
No, I think you're part of the same coin, mate. Honestly, you really are.
Well, Rodney, I don't mind what people call me, but to call me part of the global elite is frankly ludicrous.
How much did you spend on your lunch today?
I haven't had lunch today.
How much did you spend on your lunch today?
Rodney,
where did you eat it?
Rodney, I'm not having lunch today. I had eggs and bacon for breakfast, and I won't be eating for another 12 hours because I'm busy doing stuff. Rodney from Bradford.
Where are you?
I tell you what.
Where are you? In New York?
I'm not in New York. I'm in Los Angeles. Rodney, you're a waste of time. You come on, you make accusations that you simply can't back up. I think, frankly, it's pretty insulting stuff. Always best in life, when you attack people, to have some evidence to substantiate it. Brendan is calling from Nottingham. Brendan, good evening.
Hello there, Nigel. I've got in front of me the OECD's website.
Yep.
Right at the top, our mission.
Yep.
The mission of the OECD is to promote policies that will improve the economic and social well-being of people around the world. Now, that's fine. In which case, if that's the case, why did the OECD say, right, okay, The decision is Brexit. That's called democracy. Therefore, EU, we call you and call on you to do a deal with the UK so the people, the whole of Europe, the United Kingdom and all the other 27 countries, the economies do not crash, and therefore it will improve the economic and social well-being of the people around the world, because that is our job to do. Respect democracy and call on the EU and the UK to do a deal. Now, why didn't they do that instead?
Brendan, you're absolutely right. And everybody listening to this, by the way, every single person listening to this that is against Brexit and thinks it could cause economic harm should, Brendan, be joining you and me with this argument that it's the OECD's job, given the referendum result, to encourage a free trade agreement between us and the European Union. You are absolutely 100% on the money with that analysis. But what I'm getting, Brendan, I'm getting people who think it's a mistake to leave the EU, who are not prepared to see through the logic of that case, and that what the OECD has done today is wrong. And Brendan, do you also agree with me that this is part of a bigger global elite using whatever leverage they can to try and stop Brexit?
Oh, absolutely, without a doubt, Nigel. I mean, a perfect example, apart from that horrible, vile Blair man, honestly, yuck, I can't stand the bloke.
Well,
but basically, apart from him, look at our favourite, Mr. Clegg. Now, when he came into power, joint power with Cameron, it was like the country's in a mess, or whatever the situation is, but for the benefit and the will and for the United Kingdom, we must work together to make this work. And why is it then, when a democratic decision is made that he doesn't like, we've got to do all our can to have it reversed. We've got to do everything to make it fail.
I know, Brendan.
The United Kingdom, the people
Brendan, I'm with you. I get it. I thank you for your call. I move on to Tony in Wimbledon. Tony, good evening. The OECD are urging us to have a second referendum. Are they working in cahoots with Clinton, Blair and everybody else, or have I got this completely wrong?
Well, I'd like to think that that's not the case. But I look at the situation as it stands, and I'm going to ask you, based upon your years of experience of business, and also being somebody who's worked in the EU machinery, what is a worst-case scenario for this country come the date that there is no deal and then we're actually then stepping out of the EU? How will the big corporations respond to us? How do we counter the fact that money now is electronic and it'll take a few press of a keyboard and a vast amount of money can move out of this country?
Well, a vast amount of money, Tony, can move out of this country or into this country. What we have to do is be prepared technically for a no deal, which means we need devices at Dover to photograph number plates and lorries and all of those things, and we'll need an extended border force. Of course, that is true. But the point, Tony, is this. The deal we currently have, all right, costs us a very large sum of money. Up to £10 billion net every year, simply to have tariff-free access to the European market. But not just do we pay £10 billion, we also have to adhere to all of the EU rules, many of which may not suit us, and crucially, we're banned from forming our own relationships trade-wise across the rest of the world. So I contend, Tony, that no deal would be a lot better than the deal we currently have. And if that's where we have to go, that's where we have to go. I would rather, just for ease and simplicity, that we continued with a tariff-free trading relationship, which logically is what the Europeans should give us. But hey, they're not. I thank you, folks. Lots of strong opinions on this today. I think the OECD are wrong, but that's life.